Let me tell you something. When people said it was impossible, India showed the world that nothing is impossible. America thought they were untouchable, but India's strike, it crushed their pride, it humiliated their power, and it inspired billions. This is the story of strength, of courage, of rising up when the world doubts you. And today, we learn the lessons from that victory. Power respects power. That is a truth that has been proven in every era, in every battlefield, in every political conflict, and in every struggle where dominance is challenged. Nations may talk about peace, diplomacy, treaties, and balance, but at the core of every interaction between powerful entities lies one reality. Respect does not come from begging. Respect does not come from weakness. Respect comes only when strength is shown and strength is proven. India's strike that shook America was not just a military act. It was a demonstration that in this world, even the mightiest must acknowledge and bow to power when it rises in unexpected places. For decades, America had positioned itself as the supreme force, the ultimate authority, the nation that could not be challenged. Every country, whether willingly or reluctantly, had to respect or fear American power. But fear is not the same as respect. Fear fades the moment weakness is revealed, but respect is earned the moment strength is displayed. When India executed its strike, it was a signal to the world that respect is not reserved for those who speak the loudest or boast the most, but for those who take action with courage, precision, and strength. This is the law of nature itself. Look at the animal kingdom. The lion is called the king not because it is the biggest animal, not because it is the most intelligent, but because it has the will and ferocity to assert itself. Every creature respects the lion not because it asks for respect, but because it demands it through power. In human history, empires rose not by asking to be acknowledged, but by proving their strength repeatedly. Rome dominated because it projected unstoppable power. The Mongols swept across continents because they showed no hesitation in unleashing force when challenged. Power respects power and nothing else. India's action forced America, the so-called superpower, to feel the sting of humiliation. And humiliation is not something that happens when words are exchanged. Humiliation happens when strength is tested, and one side realizes that the opponent has the will and ability to strike back. America was not humiliated by speeches or threats, but by decisive action. That action transformed India's image overnight. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. India was no longer just a developing nation, no longer just a land of potential. It became a nation that could stand tall, look a superpower in the eye, and strike when needed. This is not just about nations, it is about human life as well. In every field, whether it is business, sports, or personal growth, power respects power. If you enter the arena with doubt, hesitation, and weakness, nobody will give you respect. You will be overlooked, ignored, maybe even mocked. But the moment you show strength, whether it is through results, through discipline, through relentless action, the entire world begins to look at you differently. People who once ignored you begin to acknowledge you. Rivals who once underestimated you begin to fear you. Allies who once doubted you begin to trust you. That is how respect works. India's strike carried a message beyond borders. Respect cannot be given freely, it must be earned through action. America had to acknowledge that its dominance was not eternal. When power rises elsewhere, even the mighty must adjust. This balance of power is the foundation of world order. Without power, diplomacy is just words. Without power, promises are meaningless, but with power, everything changes. Negotiations tilt in your favor, enemies think twice before challenging, and the world begins to align around your presence. When India struck, it wasn't just about the immediate target, it was about the psychological message that rippled across the globe. That message said, we will not be bullied, we will not be overlooked. We have the strength and we will use it when necessary. That is the essence of power respecting power. Even America, with all its arrogance, had to process that message. It could no longer pretend that it alone dictated the rules. It realized that India had stepped into a new arena, one where it had to be recognized as a force. Think about it. When you walk into a room, people notice two kinds of energy: weakness, which gets dismissed, and power, which gets respected. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent, steady, disciplined, and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. India's power was silent for years, building, preparing, waiting. And then, in that single decisive act, it revealed itself to the world. That is why the strike was not just an attack, it was a statement. A statement that forced even the strongest to pause and recognize that respect is earned only through power. Doubt fuels determination. Every great act of courage, every leap of progress, every bold move that shook the world has always faced doubt before it happened. Doubt is the shadow that appears the moment someone dares to dream big or act differently. It is the voice of the skeptics, the critics, and sometimes even the closest allies who cannot imagine the possibility of success. When India prepared for its strike, the atmosphere was filled with doubt. Could it be done? Would it succeed? Would the consequences be too severe? The world doubted, America doubted, and even within India there were whispers of hesitation. But it was precisely that doubt which became the fire in the heart of determination. When others tell you that you cannot, it creates two paths: surrender or strength. Those who surrender allow doubt to defeat them before the battle even begins. Those who choose strength use doubt as the spark that ignites an unstoppable will. India chose strength. It took the doubt of the world and converted it into raw determination. Every soldier, every strategist, every leader involved understood that proving the doubters wrong was not just an option, it was the mission itself. The humiliation of being underestimated became the fuel for precise execution. Doubt, when harnessed, creates an intensity that comfort can never provide. Comfort makes people complacent, but doubt pushes them to sharpen their skills, refine their strategies, and prepare for every possible obstacle. India's determination did not come from easy belief, it came from the challenge of disbelief, and history has always shown that when the world doubts you, that is the greatest opportunity to rise. Nobody doubted America when it flexed its power, but everyone doubted India. That doubt created a different kind of energy, one that did not rely on arrogance, but on sheer willpower to prove the impossible. Great individuals and great nations thrive when faced with doubt. It forces them to dig deeper, to find strength they didn't even know they had. The Wright brothers were doubted when they spoke of flying. Edison was doubted when he spoke of light. Gandhi was doubted when he spoke of defeating an empire without violence. Doubt followed every revolutionary idea, but instead of being a chain, it became a weapon. That same energy was alive when India struck and stunned the world. America could not comprehend that a nation they underestimated would dare to stand tall and deliver a blow. But that disbelief became the very reason why the strike succeeded. It was unexpected, it was unthinkable, it was the embodiment of turning doubt into determination. In life, the most dangerous enemy is not failure, it is doubt. Failure gives lessons, but doubt kills before the attempt even begins. To act in the face of doubt requires courage, discipline, and vision. India showed that courage. The leaders who gave the green light understood the risks, but they also understood the greater truth. If you allow doubt to dictate your choices, you will remain forever in the shadow of those who doubt you. Determination is born when you refuse to live under that shadow. The psychological impact of doubt is powerful. When someone doubts you, it triggers an instinct to either shrink back or fight harder. Determination is forged when that doubt is absorbed, processed, and transformed into motivation. Every soldier who carried out the mission knew that the eyes of doubters were watching. Every strategist who planned it knew that critics were waiting for failure. And yet, instead of crumbling, they embraced the challenge. That is why the strike was not just an act of military might, it was a declaration of mindset, the mindset that says, your doubt will be my determination. Doubt creates pressure, and pressure creates diamonds. Without the skepticism of the world, without the sneers of rivals, determination does not burn as fiercely. India's determination was sharpened because it was forced to prove itself in front of those who thought it could not. That is the power of doubt when it is redirected. It no longer weakens, it strengthens. It no longer restrains, it accelerates. It becomes the invisible force that drives people to do what was once thought impossible. Every breakthrough, every triumph, every unforgettable moment in history carries the fingerprints of doubt. And behind those fingerprints lies the story of determination that rose higher than the doubts themselves. India's strike was exactly that kind of story. The doubt of the world became the energy that fueled its determination to rise and act decisively in the face of overwhelming odds. Discipline builds dominance. Strength without control is wasted energy, and ambition without order is chaos. The true difference between those who dream and those who dominate lies in discipline. India's strike that humiliated America was not the product of impulse, it was not an accident, it was not a wild gamble. It was the result of disciplined preparation, meticulous execution, and unwavering commitment to order. Discipline is what separates a moment of action from a moment of weakness. Without discipline, power collapses under its own weight, but with discipline, power becomes unstoppable. Discipline is the invisible force that keeps focus alive when distractions try to pull it apart. It is the quality that turns potential into performance. India could not have carried out its strike simply by relying on passion or emotion. It required soldiers who had trained relentlessly, leaders who had rehearsed every scenario, and planners who had calculated every risk. That is what discipline creates, the ability to act with precision when the stakes are at their highest. Dominance is never built overnight. It is built over years of practice, sacrifice, and the willingness to stay consistent when others lose their way. When America underestimated India, it was because they failed to see the discipline that had been quietly developing. They looked only at surface appearances and ignored the years of preparation, the drills, the strategies, and the mental toughness that had been forged. Discipline works in silence. It does not boast, it does not announce itself. It waits until the right moment, and then it reveals its strength in a way that cannot be ignored. India's discipline became its weapon, and that weapon was sharper than any arrogance America carried. Dominance requires more than just strength. It requires the ability to repeat excellence until it becomes a natural state. That repetition is discipline. Soldiers who wake before dawn, who train in the harshest conditions, who repeat the same actions thousands of times until they can perform them flawlessly under pressure. This is what makes dominance possible. Leaders who study every angle, who remain patient, who resist the temptation to act too soon. This is discipline in strategy. Nations that stay committed to growth even when the world doubts them. This is discipline in vision. Every level of discipline creates layers of dominance that eventually cannot be denied. History has always proven that the most dominant forces are not the ones who shouted the loudest, but the ones who maintained discipline when others gave up. Rome lasted for centuries because of its disciplined legions. The Spartans became legends because their discipline created warriors who could stand against overwhelming odds. Even modern victories, whether in business, sports, or war, belong to those who embraced discipline when others surrendered to chaos. Discipline is the foundation upon which dominance is built. Without it, strength dissolves into recklessness. With it, strength transforms into authority. India's strike was an example of discipline working at every level, from the intelligence gathered to the timing of the attack to the execution on the ground. Every step was measured, precise, and calculated. That level of detail is impossible without discipline. It was not emotion that humiliated America, it was order. It was not anger that sent shockwaves across the globe, it was control. Discipline held everything together, and because of that, India was able to showcase not just power but power in its most effective form. Discipline is also what creates respect. Power alone might create fear, but fear fades. Respect comes when power is consistent, reliable, and controlled. America realized through that strike that India's rise was not a momentary act, but the result of years of discipline that had been building beneath the surface. Dominance becomes undeniable when it is backed by the kind of discipline that cannot be shaken. Even at the personal level, discipline is the bridge between goals and greatness. People who want to dominate in their field cannot rely on talent alone. Talent might win attention, but discipline wins longevity. It is discipline that makes an athlete wake up earlier than their competitors, a business leader study harder than their rivals, a soldier train longer than their enemies. That discipline compounds over time, creating a gap so wide that dominance becomes inevitable. India's example showed that discipline is the quiet force behind every bold victory. The world may celebrate the strike, but the real victory was the discipline that made it possible. Dominance is not an accident, it is the natural result of years of control, consistency, and commitment. Discipline builds dominance, and when dominance is built, even the greatest powers must acknowledge it. Strategy defeats strength. History has proven again and again that raw power alone cannot guarantee victory. Armies with the biggest numbers, nations with the largest weapons, and individuals with the greatest physical capacity often lose to those who know how to think smarter, plan deeper, and strike with precision. Strength may intimidate, but strategy directs. Without strategy, strength is blind, and blind strength always stumbles. India's strike that humiliated America was not about having the biggest arsenal or the largest military budget. It was about using intelligence, timing, and planning to turn limited resources into a decisive blow that shook the confidence of a superpower. Strategy is the art of turning disadvantages into advantages. It does not require you to be the strongest. It requires you to be the smartest in how you apply what you have. America had unmatched resources, advanced technology, and global reach, but India had clarity of vision and a plan designed to exploit weaknesses. That is the power of strategy. It identifies the cracks in even the toughest armor and drives the strike exactly where it hurts the most. Strength can overwhelm, but strategy can outthink, and when the two collide, the mind often defeats the muscle. Throughout history, the underdog has always relied on strategy to topple the giant. David did not defeat Goliath by being stronger, he defeated him by being smarter and more precise. The Greeks at Thermopylae used terrain and timing to hold off an army vastly larger than their own. Guerrilla fighters have toppled empires because strategy allowed them to fight on their terms rather than on the enemy's. The same principle applied to India's strike. Instead of playing on America's ground, instead of entering a contest of brute force, India created a strategy that gave it the upper hand despite being underestimated. Strength often creates arrogance. The strong begin to believe that size alone will protect them, that numbers alone will guarantee respect. That arrogance leads to complacency, and complacency creates openings. Strategy feeds on those openings. America's mistake was believing that its unmatched power made it untouchable. India's wisdom was realizing that the untouchable could be touched if the right plan was executed with precision. That is why the strike resonated so deeply. It was a reminder to the world that no matter how strong you appear, strategy has the power to turn the tide. In war, business, politics, and personal life, strategy is the equalizer. A smaller competitor can defeat a larger rival if they understand timing, placement, and opportunity. A weaker opponent can humiliate a stronger one if they know exactly where to hit. Strength without direction wastes energy, but strategy channels even a small amount of strength into maximum impact. India did not need to overpower America, it only needed to outthink it, and that is exactly what strategy provides, the ability to use what you have in the smartest way possible. Strategy requires discipline, patience, and foresight. It is not built on emotion or impulse, it is built on calculation. The strike was not a reaction, it was a deliberate move born from hours, days, and months of careful planning. Every action was mapped, every consequence weighed, every risk calculated. That is why it succeeded. Strength may rush into battle, but strategy waits, studies, and strikes at the perfect moment. That patience is what multiplies effectiveness and transforms modest resources into extraordinary results. Even in individual lives, strategy is what allows people to rise above obstacles. You may not have the most money, the most connections, or the most advantages, but with the right strategy, you can position yourself to win. Strength fades with time, but strategy compounds with wisdom. Nations rise and fall not simply because of their armies, but because of the strategies their leaders employ. Dominance in the modern world is no longer about who has the biggest guns. It is about who can apply intelligence and foresight in the smartest way. India's strike was the embodiment of this truth. America, the strongest nation in the world, was shaken not by a stronger force, but by a smarter move. It was not the size of the action that mattered, it was the brilliance of the plan behind it. Strategy took what seemed impossible and made it undeniable. Strategy turned doubt into shock, weakness into strength, and caution into courage. Strategy defeated strength, and that lesson will continue to echo across history whenever the world forgets that raw power alone is never enough. Unity creates unstoppable force. No matter how strong an individual may be, no matter how powerful a weapon might seem, no matter how advanced a technology becomes, none of it compares to the strength that arises when people unite behind a single cause. Unity transforms scattered energy into concentrated power, and that power is what changes the course of history. India's strike that humiliated America was not the act of a single person, nor the brilliance of one leader alone, but the collective will of a nation that stood together in purpose and action. Unity is the multiplier of strength. A divided group, no matter how talented, will always collapse under pressure because division creates weakness, hesitation, and confusion. But a united group, even if limited in resources, becomes far greater than the sum of its parts. India's unity came from a shared belief that it was time to prove its strength, time to show the world that it could no longer be underestimated. That collective belief gave courage to the soldiers, clarity to the leaders, and confidence to the people who supported the mission. History is filled with examples where unity overcame overwhelming odds. The American Revolution was not won because colonists had superior strength, but because they united against a common enemy. The independence of India itself was achieved not by a few individuals, but by millions standing together under one cause. Whenever humanity has faced impossible challenges, unity has been the weapon that turned the impossible into reality. That is the nature of unity. It gives ordinary people extraordinary power by binding them with a shared vision. America miscalculated because it underestimated India's unity. It believed divisions, doubts, or fear would hold India back. But unity silenced those doubts. Once the decision was made, the nation moved like a single force, every layer of planning and execution synchronized, every person involved committed to success. That is what makes unity so powerful. It eliminates hesitation and replaces it with collective momentum. A united force cannot be easily intimidated because its strength comes not from one person but from millions of voices moving in the same direction. In the battlefield of life, unity is what builds resilience. One individual may break under the weight of pressure, but a united team holds firm. One voice may be ignored, but a chorus of voices demands attention. India's strike was successful because unity bound together intelligence, courage, planning, and execution into one seamless act. Without unity, strength fragments. With unity, strength amplifies. Unity also creates identity. It gives people a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. That belonging inspires sacrifice, loyalty, and endurance. Soldiers fight not only for survival, but for their brothers and sisters beside them. Citizens support bold actions because they feel connected to the mission. Leaders act decisively because they know the people stand with them. Unity builds this cycle of trust, and once it is established, it becomes nearly impossible to stop. India's unity in that moment turned a strike into a statement that the entire world had to acknowledge. Even in personal life, unity plays a role. A person who aligns their mind, body, and spirit creates inner unity, and that unity produces clarity and focus. Families who stay united can overcome financial struggles, health crises, and social challenges. Communities that stay united can resist oppression and build prosperity. At every level, unity transforms vulnerability into strength. It removes isolation and replaces it with collective courage. Unity is feared by the powerful because it neutralizes the advantages of size and dominance. America realized that its might could be challenged not because India had equal weapons, but because India had equal will, and that will came from unity. A disunited nation is easy to control, but a united one is unshakable. That is why empires in history often fell, not because they were conquered from outside, but because they lost unity within. India's unity in that decisive moment showed the opposite. A nation coming together, rising together, and acting together. Unity is also contagious. When people see others standing together, they are inspired to join. One act of unity sparks another, creating waves of strength that spread far beyond the original cause. India's unity sent a message to its people and to the world. When united, even the most underestimated nation can rise to the level of dominance. The strike was not just an act of force, it was a reflection of a united spirit that refused to be divided, and that spirit is what made it unstoppable. Humiliation turns into history. Every great nation, every legendary figure, every unstoppable movement has faced moments of humiliation. It is the sting of being underestimated, the pain of being disrespected, the sharp wound of being mocked or ignored. But those who refuse to break under humiliation, those who transform that pain into power, are the ones who carve their names into history. India's strike that humiliated America is one of those rare moments where humiliation reversed its course. What was meant to belittle India instead became the very act that elevated it to a new place in the world order. Humiliation has always been one of the most powerful motivators in human history. It burns deep, it lingers in the heart, and it creates an energy that is far stronger than comfort or pride. When someone humiliates you, you have two choices: accept the role they assign to you, or rise and prove them wrong. Nations work the same way. For years, India was treated as a secondary force in global politics. It was respected for its culture, its size, and its potential, but it was often dismissed when it came to true strength. America and other powers believed India would never dare to challenge them, never dare to assert itself boldly. That underestimation was itself a form of humiliation, but humiliation is a seed. When planted in the soil of determination, it grows into a tree of victory. India carried that humiliation, but it did not carry it as weakness. It carried it as fuel. Every insult, every doubt, every dismissal became part of the energy that drove leaders to act decisively. That is how humiliation transforms. It sharpens focus, it removes hesitation, and it forces people to rise beyond limitations. America never expected that humiliation would backfire, never imagined that the very act of looking down on India would give India the strength to rise higher. History is full of examples where humiliation was the turning point. Japan, after its defeat in World War II, carried the humiliation of destruction, yet that humiliation became the foundation for one of the fastest and most powerful economic resurgences the world has ever seen. Nations like Germany, after being humiliated, rebuilt themselves into disciplined powers. Even great leaders, Abraham Lincoln after countless failures, Nelson Mandela after decades in prison, turned humiliation into a story the world would never forget. India's strike falls into that same pattern. Humiliation at the hands of global arrogance transformed into a chapter of history written with boldness. Humiliation creates memory, and memory becomes motivation. Strength alone can fade, but the memory of being humiliated stays alive for generations. It becomes a reminder of what must never be allowed again. For India, the strike was not only about the immediate objective, but about rewriting the memory of being seen as a passive nation. It was about declaring to the world that the days of humiliation were over. In that moment, history shifted because humiliation no longer belonged to India. It belonged to America, the nation that was caught unprepared, the nation that realized even its supremacy could be challenged. Humiliation, when embraced with courage, also creates identity. People unite not only in pride, but in the refusal to suffer the same humiliation again. This is why nations rebuild stronger after defeat, why athletes train harder after a loss, why individuals push past their limits after being told they are not enough. That burning memory of humiliation becomes the compass that directs every step forward. India's strike carried that same sense of identity. It was a response to years of being underestimated, and it was a statement that such humiliation would no longer define its place in the world. Even at a personal level, humiliation can be the starting point of greatness. Many people who have achieved extraordinary things began their journey not in pride but in pain. They were laughed at, ignored, or rejected. Instead of letting that destroy them, they turned it into the foundation for their determination. Humiliation strips away illusions and forces clarity. It forces you to decide whether you will accept weakness or rise into strength. That is the same choice nations face, and India chose to rise. What made India's strike so powerful was that it reversed the roles. For years, America had been the one humiliating others, the one exercising dominance and forcing submission. But in that moment, the tables turned. The humiliation that India had carried was transferred to America, and once humiliation shifts, history shifts. The strong are reminded that they are not untouchable, and the underestimated are reminded that they are capable of more than the world believed. That is the transformation of humiliation into history, the moment when pain becomes power, and the memory of defeat becomes the story of victory. Courage crushes fear. Fear is the natural response when the stakes are high, when the risks are real, and when the consequences could shake the future. Every soldier feels it before the battle. Every leader feels it before the decision. Every human being feels it before taking a bold step. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of it. Courage is the weapon that transforms fear into energy, that takes hesitation and converts it into decisive motion. India's strike that humiliated America was not carried out in a vacuum of safety. It was executed under enormous risk, under the shadow of possible retaliation, under the pressure of global attention. Fear was everywhere, but courage crushed it. Courage is born when the mission is greater than the fear. Every person who was part of that operation knew the risks. They knew America's power. They knew the consequences if anything went wrong. They knew the scale of danger, and yet they moved forward. That is what courage looks like. It does not deny fear. It faces it directly and says, "You will not stop me." Without courage, no plan, no strategy, no vision could ever have turned into reality. It was courage that made men and women step into the unknown and act with conviction. Fear paralyzes, but courage liberates. A fearful mind finds reasons to delay, to hesitate, to retreat. A courageous mind finds reasons to act, to move, to strike. The difference between those who make history and those who are forgotten is often this single factor, whether fear dominated them or courage lifted them. India's strike was the kind of act that required courage at every level, from the soldier on the ground to the highest office of decision-making. Fear could have easily dictated restraint, but courage dictated action. Throughout history, courage has always been the key that unlocks impossible victories. The Spartans at Thermopylae knew they faced certain death, but their courage held back an empire. Alexander the Great faced armies far larger than his own, but his courage to push forward created an empire that stretched across continents. Mahatma Gandhi faced an empire with no weapons, but his courage crushed the fear that had gripped millions of Indians and turned them into a united force for freedom. Courage has always been the invisible strength behind visible victories. Fear is powerful because it whispers doubt. It tells you that you are not strong enough, that the risk is too high, that failure is inevitable. Courage answers back by proving that doubt wrong. Courage is not about having guarantees, it is about choosing to act without them. That is why courage always commands respect. The world may admire strength, but it bows to courage, because courage is what allows strength to be applied in the first place. India's courage showed the world that fear could no longer chain it down. That courage crushed the myth of untouchability that America carried. Courage also inspires. When one person or one nation acts with courage, it sends a ripple of strength through all who witness it. Fear is contagious, but so is courage. The strike inspired millions across India and beyond, proving that when courage takes charge, anything is possible. This is why courage has always been the foundation of leadership. Leaders are not defined by titles or positions, but by their ability to act with courage when fear surrounds them. India's leadership proved its strength by showing that courage was greater than the fear of retaliation, greater than the fear of criticism, greater than the fear of failure. Even in personal life, courage is the deciding factor that separates mediocrity from greatness. People who wait for fear to disappear will wait forever, because fear never leaves completely. Those who step forward despite fear create breakthroughs. The athlete who pushes past fear of defeat, the entrepreneur who pushes past fear of loss, the student who pushes past fear of failure. All of them prove that courage is the force that crushes fear and opens doors that fear tried to keep locked. India's strike was more than a military action. It was a symbol of courage that chose not to bow to fear. It showed the world that fear may exist, but courage has the power to dominate it. That act was a living reminder that courage does not ask for permission, courage does not wait for approval, courage simply acts. And when courage acts, fear loses its power. Courage crushes fear, and in doing so, it redefines what is possible.